to your first Skillshare lesson for Stippling for Beginners. My name is Bianca Hawk, and I have been stippling for roughly about 13 or 14 years. Stippling is a fun medium, at least for me. The technique takes a lot of patience and time, and in this lesson today we will quickly be covering stippling versus pointillism. What's the difference and why does it matter? And then I will be covering some of the supplies you'll be needing in this class. Now keep in mind, you don't have to have all these supplies. Basically, you only need one good pen that you can work with that you like, and a piece of paper that works well with that pen. And then you can basically execute any of the projects that we have going and the final project. And so let's delve into that. So thank you guys for joining me, and comments and questions are always welcome. Let's get started.
So let's begin with the basics. Stippling is the monochromatic use of dots to create an image. Here, monochromatic means using only one color. I usually only use black, but you don't have to use just black. You can do an entire image out of green, red, blue, whatever color you like, and it would still be considered stippling as long as you stick to one color. Now here we have a piece that I did called Freud. This was actually a gift from my sister, and this was done on a large A3 sketchpad paper. And it's done completely here in black ink using micron pens. As you can see, all of the shadows and the light is done completely using stippling, and no color on the skin, hair, or clothing. So that is basically what stippling is. Now, stippling is often confused with pointillism, which is the use of multicolored dots to create an image. Now here's an example of where pointillism actually originated. This is a very common and very famous painting by Georges Seurat, and it is done in oil paint, but it is still using pointillism, so dots, to create the full image. And here he uses multiple colors, not just a single color, and that's what makes this pointillism. So now that you've had a bit of a history of where the names came from and what they mean, now let's get going with our supplies. So the most important part of all of this is the type of pen that you use. That's going to make the biggest difference in what kind of results you're going to have. So here I have some of the pens that I have used in the past when I have done stippling, and you can basically use any pen that you have lying around the house. It's not that important. This is just for practice so you can get the hang of the technique. So here I have just a regular Stabilo in black ink that you can basically get from almost any store, and it works just fine. So this one is just okay if you want to practice, and it has a fairly good dot when it makes an imprint on the page. This is a regular good old Staedtler blue pen. I think it's a ballpoint pen, and this is also great for just regular practice. So this is one of the pens that I will be using in my demonstration in the next video. This is actually the pen that I used in my introduction. This is another Staedtler, but this is a fine liner, and this is also waterproof. So you can use this if you want to do watercolor paintings with your stippling. This is another pen. This is actually the first pen that I ever did my stippling with. This is a Precise V5 pen. It's a rolling ball, and it's extra fine. So we're also going to be using this to experiment in the next lesson. And micron pens are by far my favorite for stippling. I highly recommend these. These are also waterproof, so if you would like to paint something with watercolor afterwards, these are also great. A pack like this here in Finland goes anywhere between 8 to 14 euros, and it comes with different sizes, as you can see here. So normally I work with the 005 or the 01. For my work. The 01 is usually the one I use the most. It's a good middle ground type of pen. Now I have one more here that I'm going to show you guys, but I'm not going to demonstrate this when we do our practice round, because this is actually a very delicate pen. This is a Rotring repeatograph. So these are usually used by architects and drafting students and so on. They have very, very fine nibs. This one's nib actually has sunk in. But anyway, these ones are very, very sensitive and can break quite easily. So for our needs, this is a little bit too advanced for beginners. But in future, you can try and look something like this up. This is actually very thick. That's why this nib is so large.
Normally, I use a much thinner one than the 1.0. But anyway, so if you're interested in going into a more professional pen later in your stippling career, I do recommend the rotring repeatographs, or basically any kind of repeatograph actually works really well with stippling once you get the hang of it. But for now, for our class purposes, any one of these types of pens or anything that you have flying around the house will work just fine. We're going to do a practice run in the next lesson and see how that goes. So now that we have our pens all sorted out, the next thing will be our paper. So paper is just as important as the types of pen that you're using when it comes to stippling. So the paper depends on your purpose, your end goal when you're stippling. For this exercise, you won't necessarily need very strong paper, but if you'd like to experiment and see what happens with your pens on what kinds of paper, I would highly suggest that you get different kinds of papers to experiment with. So for regular sketchbook paper, I have something like this. This doesn't even have any grams on it. It's just basically very thin sketchbook paper. It will do just fine for any of the stippling assignments that you have or any future projects. It's very basic. It's almost the same as printing paper. So if you have something like this around the house, that's just fine. It doesn't have to be very expensive. As you can see, this was only €2.50. So you don't have to break the bank. If, on the other hand, you want to do something on paper that's going to last a bit longer and is a bit stronger, I have 110 gram paper here. This is normal sketchbook paper. I've used this paper quite a lot with my stippling projects, so I can recommend that 110 grams works really well. So if you have something like this, that's also really good to have. Now, if your purpose is to paint, you will have to do your stippling on watercolor paper. Here I have a very basic 140 gram watercolor paper. It's not the best on the market, but it will do just fine. And for our experiments that we're going to be doing here in practices, this is just fine. And then if you want to do something a bit more professional, if you actually intend on making a finished piece that you'd like to frame or sell or give as a gift, you can get something like the 220 gram watercolor paper. And then you can do all of your stippling practice on this and then see how it turns out after you've painted. And again, with watercolors, you need to use something like a micron pen that is water resistant when you do your stippling. So regular pens probably won't work with this kind of stuff. So that's the paper covered.
So thank you guys so much for joining me here in my first lesson and my introduction to stippling and what kind of art supplies you'll be needing. In lesson 2, we'll be covering what pen types there are available and the marks that they leave, paper reaction to those pen marks, and you'll also be creating your own gradient chart. So I'm looking forward to seeing you guys there. Thank you so much for watching, and let's get started on the stippling journey. See you in lesson 2.